So I was just checking a couple of things. Somebody was asking if traditional saunas, dry electric, or steam saunas have some level of EMF in them also. Well, of course they do. Guys, the whole EMF thing is really blown. It's not out of proportion, but it's out of context. There's no context when people are saying, there's a difference between getting in a traditional Finnish sauna or a dry electric traditional steam sauna. Of course there's EMF around the generator, which I'll show you in a second. But that's very different than a company marketing their product to you like in an EMF free or a zero EMF sauna, when in fact you have, not in this particular sauna, but just as an example, if you have unshielded wiring and you have emitters that have 100 milligauss magnetic field, AC magnetic field, 2 inches from your brain, that's quite a bit different than a traditional sauna. Of course, this has high EMF also. They all do, but usually it's not right next to your head. It's also not marketed to you as some zero EMF, thing. And you're not paying an extra $2,500 like you are at some infrared sauna companies when they're misrepresenting the product or falsely advertising the product to you. Now, does that mean that it doesn't matter at all? No, but the context. It's not EMF is good or EMF is bad. Just because there's EMF in your garage at your house next to the power panel doesn't inherently make EMF bad, right? Now, if your master bedroom, where your headboard is right next to that adjacent wall where the main power panel is in the garage, that's an issue. Because why? Not because EMF is bad or good. EMF is meant to be understood. The fear-mongering of EMF is worse than the exposure itself. But if you think that RF radiation or magnetic fields or electric fields or whatever doesn't have impact on your nervous system, you're kidding yourself. Now, are you going to be around exposures throughout the day and different things like that anyway? Of course. But in things like stuff that's supposed to be healing equipment for you, your sleeping environment, you should be in a sleep sanctuary. You really want to minimize your exposure because the exposure limit or the rate time is very high. You're in that environment for 8+ hours. Is the sauna going to kill you because it's high EMF? No. But if you're doing complex detox protocols where you're in there for, 20, 30, 40 hours a month, is that exposure limit pretty significant versus using a kitchen appliance like a blender, which has the same level of EMF if it's an unshielded infrared sauna or something like that? The exposure limit's very low. What are you in front of it for 10 minutes, but you're actually only pulsing it for 60 to 120 seconds? It's a huge difference. And it's also doesn't have AC wiring going directly up to your head, basically blanketing your entire body in EMF. Now, that said, EMF's not important to everybody. If it's not something that you believe in or you think it's some tomfoolery or whatever, then have at it. It doesn't really, it's not going to affect the next person or another person's viewpoint if you decide that a low EMF sauna is not worth it for you, or you don't believe that, or it's some type of, hocus pocus. No big deal. But for the people that care about it, here's basically the basis of it. Anything that plugs into a wall is going to have some level of EMF. Any type of closed circulation hot box or sauna that has building materials in it, even your house, is going to have some level of VOC. People that say that something that plugs into a wall has zero EMF or hardly any, ultra low or near zero EMF, are lying to you. There's current that it's plugging into, there's voltage, there's amperage. EMF is a plural term. There's electromagnetic fields. That's 2 things: electric fields, magnetic fields. Then you have companies, not this one, but then you have companies that put Wi-Fi transmitters and Bluetooth transmitters separately, both with antennas, directly over your head in some of the saunas. Well, the signal for these is sometimes very strong. This doesn't have anything to do with traditional saunas per se, even though some of them have Wi-Fi controllers in order to be able to turn the thing on. But some of the other companies that have smart systems built into their sauna, they're putting a transmitter directly over your head, which is basically like being right next to your Wi-Fi emitter, or in your house or in your office or wherever it is that you are. Now, these are not electric or magnetic fields. It's RF radiation. They're measured completely differently. So when somebody says, a sauna has less EMF than your cell phone, that's not really a great comparison. It's really apples to oranges. You wouldn't measure the same. And I wouldn't be too concerned with some of the brands that have Wi-Fi transmitters in them, as long as it's not one of the ones that leaves it on all the time, even if the sauna is powered off. In my opinion, this is stupid. It's very bad. A lot of times people put these saunas in their master bedrooms, and the only way to get it to stop pinging, searching for signal or looking to connect to a device, even if the sauna control panel is off. This is not this brand, by the way. This brand doesn't have any of that. That's why I love it. Is to unplug it. And so I think that's terrible. It's the nature of the beast, though, because if the sauna is off and you have a smartphone controller and you want to be able to turn the sauna on remotely, it has to constantly be able to search for signal. Well, the issue with that is if you put it in a master bedroom right next to your bed, even if it's one of the brands that doesn't have that feature or you're not using it, the thing has a transmitter that's constantly pinging right next to your bed frame. And I don't like that. I'm a person that removes all those things from my sleeping environment because I think that's extremely critical when you're in rest and digest or restoration mode. Sauna would be a tier 2. I don't think that EMF is as critical as sleeping environment in sauna. I still pay attention to it just because these newer saunas don't have nearly the level of EMF exposure that the old ones do. There used to be unshielded wiring that would come from the power supply under the seat, and they would route the cables directly up the wall, which would basically drape your entire back in 80 to 100 milligauss magnetic and electric fields. And those would just radiate out from the old ceramic rod heaters that they would use. And you would pretty much be wrapped in a field that you can't get away from. And, for somebody that was as sick as I was and trying to do detox protocols, the last thing that you want to do is stress out your nervous system more than is needed in order to get the benefits that you're trying to do. So that said, hopefully that adds some context into my belief structure or my analysis structure of how I analyze EMF or how I view, is EMF important in particular healing equipment versus household appliances, cell phones, different types of various smart saunas and things like that are coming out. It's not that, some of it is good or bad. It's just, what is the situation? What's important to you? And so on and so forth. Now, I'm going to show you now, it doesn't mean that traditional saunas are immune to EMF. I mean, we're probably, I don't know, if we're right up on it, we're 100 milligauss or it trips the meter. Let's come back an inch or so. We get 80 milligauss. We get 20. So probably, 20 to 24 inches away, we drop close to a background range. Background in here is probably like 0.5, 0.6. So 30 inches away, we still have 3 or so milligauss electric fields. They won't be as bad because this is a grounded unit and I have the ground engaged, even though it's mounted on a portable little tester platform. So the reason that you don't see electric fields, because there are actually electric fields from the emitters, is because the entire chassis is grounded. I talk about this when people are selecting a red light therapy device. One of the things that comes up is like a Juve lamp. They switch to a plastic housing. And so while the actual unit and boards are grounded, the power supply is grounded to the outlet, the plastic housing is non-conductive. Right? Well, what does that mean? That means it can't be grounded. So if there are any electric fields present inside from the actual power supply in the PBMT or the red light therapy body panel unit, your body is not protected from those projected emissions. That was a mouthful. Because the chassis itself is not able to be grounded because it's non-conductive. So obviously there are premium product builder in the market. I think they should change that. Or if you're going to spend money on something like that, you might as well save a few $100s and get something that's not that non-name brand that comes with a metal chassis, much like this heater here. And so it's the same demonstration. I'll check this on a couple different meters so that it's not, one particular meter, or it's not a cheap meter or whatever. But we don't have any electric field emissions from this because it is shielded and grounded properly. We do, however, have magnetic fields. And you'll see in a second, generally in a traditional sauna, the placement, if the benches are laid out correctly, right? Because you're working off of air temperature. So you have to be at a certain elevation within the sauna in order to get the correct amount of heat. Usually, your body is not super close to this where the emission is that much of an issue. They're generally larger. However, there are some cases where there's small 2 to 4 person saunas, and this could be in a stepped configuration or a stepped bench fashion where you would be close to it. And so you'd actually get more EMF from a traditional sauna in a layout fashion like that than you would from a modern infrared sauna that is truly low EMF, and it's not just a bunch of marketing stuff. But don't fall for the scare tactics of, oh, you have to have this super nanocarbon blah 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 bullshit, heater in order to have low EMF, or you're poisoning yourself, or you're killing yourself, or whatever. It's not that. You need to be a little bit more educated. You got to dive into what's actually happening a little bit better. Let's try a little higher end meter and make sure that our measurements are sound. And just in front of this is a triple axis Gauss meter, so it's measuring XYZ on a calculation. So just under 100, this is generally extremely accurate. And if we come out, I'm not going to use a tape measure, but if we come out, 10, 12, 15 inches, it'll drop less than, 2/3. So we're at 20. If we come out to something that would be a seated body position, we're at 3 or 4 again. If we're in a traditional sauna where it's even, farther away, that will drop off to even less. Now we're getting into background, which is usually in most people's environment, they're going to be under 1 milligauss, under 0.5 milligauss, unless they live in a high EMF environment, or unless their office is a high EMF environment. And so let's just double check these measurements with a different meter and triple check electric fields. And you can see we don't have any, again, because the chassis is grounded. And there's nothing else in here that's creating an emission. Now, one of the things that I'm doing on purpose in this video is using an externally mounted heater so that you can see what happens with shielded and unshielded cabling. So if we come to the cord itself, you will get some emissions. You got 400 volts per meter of electric fields. Why is that? Well, there's current, there's voltage and amperage flowing through this. Anything, like I said, that plugs into an outlet, plugs into a wall. Now, why aren't those emissions traveling to the seated body position or the point of body contact from the heater itself? How do we get emissions from the cabling when we don't have emissions from here? Well, this is a grounded chassis, like I said. Yes, there is a ground in this wire, but I purposely made this wiring connection. This is not shielded cabling. It's not twisted cabling. There's nothing in it that's going to shield you from electric or magnetic fields in the cabling. However, the way the heater construction is and the coils are in this, the way they're grounded to the chassis, they do get shielded. And so now we're going to switch to magnetic fields, and you can see the exact same thing from the cabling. And the reason that I wanted to show you this is so that you can see magnetic field emissions both from the heater itself and from the cabling. And this might not be applicable to you in your actual sauna, but what I want you to understand is different saunas that have a different manufacturing process have those same cabling up next to your head, up next to your body, up next to your spine. And so the exposure distance is very, very close because you're up next to the backrest. So certain infrared saunas, if it was a traditional sauna that's very small, and you can see we're starting to pick it up as we go closer and closer and closer. There are some emissions from these, depends on where you sit. And again, this is going to vary from model to model. This isn't to scare anyone. It's to create an understanding piece so that you have the knowledge and the understanding of what's happening with these fields, because you can't see them. They're hard to measure. The knowledge base that's required to understand the measurements is, pretty vast. You can't just pick up one of these things and know exactly what you're doing. Plus, what I also see a lot of people doing and getting really freaked out about is they will measure an infrared sauna, they'll measure a traditional sauna, and they won't realize that on the other side of this wall, they have a series of outlets, or they have a series of an electrical panel, or there's a sub panel on the other side of that wall. And they're actually getting what's called bleed through. They're getting bleed through EMF through the wall of the sauna or through the wall of the actual structure that they're in, whether that's a residence, a commercial space, or whatever. And it's not actually the sauna, even though you could take this meter, stick it up next to this wall, and it would read very, very high, and we are in fact a very, very low EMF infrared sauna. It would appear that that's not the case. And people regularly post videos like this in Facebook groups, on YouTube, everywhere else, and they say, oh, the sauna is so terrible, when in fact they don't possess well-rounded enough knowledge to interpret what's happening. And the way that you do that is by establishing a control. You can also unplug the equipment and take baseline measurements if it's in a residence and you don't have like an actual testing environment. But for most people, that's not realistic. I mean, this is probably, I don't know, $150. This is probably $300 or $400. This is probably another couple $100. If you wanted to break out something like an NFA 1000, I don't use that for this because it's very directional, much like this. And so we're trying to check a well-rounded range of, equipment here. What I'm getting at is in some cases, just the meter selection of things that we're using, the testing equipment, is more expensive than the saunas that we're testing, right? And so for most people, to invest and try to do that is not worthwhile. What is worthwhile, though, is creating a baseline understanding of where the electric fields come from. Remember, if it plugs into a wall, and then doing a quick calculation. What's your exposure limit? Exposure limit means what is the length of time that you're in front of this emission? Right? And automatically assume that the biggest culprits that will impact your health in the most, I don't want to use that word, in the most impactful way are going to be things that you're in for a long time. Your bed, your bedroom, your sleeping environments, things when your nervous system is supposed to be switching from a stress to a non-stress state. Parasympathetic to sympathetic. You don't want to do things to overstimulate yourself. We're already overstimulated. We're on phones and apps that gather our attention all the time. We've got blue light at night. We've got all these things. And then we also have pulsing of the nervous system at night. And, some people's environment is different. Some people believe in this stuff or don't care. Some people have smart homes and this is the last thing on their mind. That's totally fine. But if you arm yourself with a little bit of knowledge and understanding of what EMFs are, and EMF is a plural term, if there's anybody out there that just says, oh, look, they wave this one little thing in front of their device and they say, oh, look, it's low EMF, that's probably a red flag right there because they have they don't have enough data collection points, and they also don't have enough understanding that there's different types of emissions based on different types of equipment, and not everything is the same. Just because you have one level from one thing, it would be like saying that DC is as harmful as AC. Well, a sauna that has a step-down transformer in it, or a sauna that's DC powered and it has a converter in it, or a red light therapy device like Andrew's, that's why I like Gambared stuff. If you have something that's DC powered, you can still get a magnetic field measurement out of it, but it's not pulsed 50 or 60 hertz. It's not the same. It doesn't have the same biological impact on the body. It doesn't have the same harmful effects toward the body as something that's AC. Though you could get a measurement out of it that would appear to be similar on a meter. That's because the meter doesn't decipher what type of source it is. So it takes a little bit of knowledge. It takes a little bit of deciphering. It takes a little bit of wisdom to be able to assess a particular situation and apply that in a scale that is appropriate. And by that I mean, picking things where your exposure limit is the highest, the stuff that you sleep in. Picking things where, if your children's crib is next to a wall where there's 14 subpanels from your apartment complex and there's a 300 milligauss magnetic field that's penetrating through the wall, even though it's a block wall with stucco and things like that, I would be far, far, far more concerned about my child's safety from something like that than I would any particular old sauna. This is one of the lowest EMF saunas on the market. I specifically put this in here so that nothing within this sauna would bleed through or affect or skew the results that we're seeing right here. Because if this sauna in fact had emissions of its own that were, adding to the levels that you see from this wouldn't make sense, because then we would be getting bleed through and contamination from all this stuff. It wouldn't be a proper environment to show you that. But the same thing is true for, a child that is next to something like that in a condo complex or a crib or something like that. That's something that I would make a change immediately on. I would freak out over something like that, whereas, a sauna or something like this, I wouldn't worry about it as much. Why? The exact example that I gave you earlier, exposure time is low. Also, I'd be really careful with children too, by the way. If you're, when they're in their development stages, you don't want to do anything that causes their that's going to mess with their cells at all. But I hope this overview makes sense. If you have questions, I'm going to put this on YouTube, but it's really for the private Facebook group, the Certified Sauna Community. If you guys have questions, or if you want, an opinion about your situation, just take a 15-second video. This is a 20-minute video, but take a 15-second video of your space or a picture and show it to me so that I can actually see it. That's the point of the Facebook group. YouTube doesn't allow us to upload pictures and show them to each other. But, if you had a garage, or if you had a bedroom place and you were trying to do an EMF analysis and you can't get a building biologist to do it for you, or it's too expensive, or you don't know how, just post a picture of exactly what's happening. And you don't have to go out and necessarily buy meters and learn all this stuff. You can just take some of the baseline characteristics that are applicable to any type of construction, and you'll pretty much have an idea of what's going on, kind of like we do with like, I don't have to come in here with the meters. Somebody tells me what sauna they have, how many kilowatts this is, whether it's 120 or 240. We pretty much know what the emissions are, how far they're going to expand out, and basically the layout of their sauna, whether or not this is even an issue for them. Same thing with the infrareds. Why? Because we've done this like 300, 400 times. And so the same thing is true with sleeping environments and EMF assessments of your home. I myself have hired building biologists to come out and test different places that I've lived in. I used to live in the airport area, and I was pretty much 5 minutes from some of the runways. And we'd get all kinds of emissions from there. There was high voltage power lines. They were over 500 feet away from my front door, yet they would still extend all the way past my place and into the lake. Is something like that a lot more detrimental than something like this? Absolutely. One, the amount of power, amperage, and voltage that it takes to extend that far exceeds anything like this. The only time you find things like that is when you live near a transformer station or high voltage power lines or things like that. In that case, I ended up moving from there because I don't like that. But I would be far more worried about something like that than an emission like this. And so a 5 milligauss emission from something like that extends throughout your entire house, which basically blankets you in an EMF, is very different than an 80 milligauss emission from this sauna heater that dissipates in 2 or 3 feet. It's not apples to oranges. And so just because somebody says, oh, something is under 10 milligauss, or oh, something is over 100 milligauss, doesn't necessarily make it super bad or super good. It's the context, it's the situation, and it's the way that you decipher, the fields that your body actually comes into contact with at point of body contact, not what's, over there, not what's over there, not what's from the core, not all this stuff. It's everything. You got to take a look at everything. So hope that makes sense. And if it plugs into a wall, it has some level of EMF. It's not to be feared. EMFs are meant to be understood. The fear mongering that's just used as a selling tool and a push tactic and all this stuff, just ignore it. Take what's applicable to you. I hope that you take, the sleeping stuff in your house a little bit more seriously than you do the EMF things. Of all the testing and all the people that I've worked with, actually just the things that I've done for myself over the years, I would say that's probably some of the most important things. And I'll continue to harp on the fact that you don't have to spend extra money to get a low EMF sauna versus a high EMF sauna. You just have to be educated enough to make a quality purchase decision and not fall into this nonsense. You don't have to spend, people send me a $4,500 sauna and say, if I spend $6,500, is that going to be lower EMF than the $4,500 one? Because the people are saying so. In a lot of cases, that's not the case. In a lot of cases, the $4,500 one is even better. They're just using that as a scare tactic. I come across as scare tactic to some people, but I actually have the equipment, the knowledge base, the tools, the resources, the experience. I've been doing this for many, many years. There's very, very few times, if you listen to me really closely, you'll see that there's very, very, very few times, maybe like 1% of the time, where I tell somebody that sauna is terrible for you, get it out of your house, don't let any members of your family use it, never use it yourself. I don't care if you don't get your money back, set it on fire. There's maybe like 2 or 3 cases where that happens, and it's only a couple different brands. And it's not just because of the EMF, it's because they use different compounds during the assembly process, different toxic adhesives, and you can smell it. And so when adhesives heat up past the set point and you're in a closed circulation or circulatory enclosure with no ventilation or minimal ventilation, that's very, very bad for you. You don't want to be breathing stuff like that. If you combine that with, unshielded cabling, high EMF, old style emitters, things like that. It's a recipe for a non-piece of healing equipment. It's a harmful piece of equipment at that point. And so unless it's one of these cases, I don't tell people to get rid of it, get it out of your house, try to get your money back, do this. I tell people to enjoy it, just create more understanding, maybe make a better informed purchase decision next time, because it probably won't cost you any extra money, to get something that's lower EMF than higher EMF. And I'm of the belief that if it's not more expensive, that it's worthwhile to do it. Because, we're going to be surrounded by some of this stuff just with all the satellites and things they're putting in the sky. Obviously, that's a very different transmission than electric and magnetic fields. It also has a very different response in the body. But the more and more and more that you can create a healing sanctuary for yourself, especially if it doesn't cost any extra money, just a little extra knowledge, the better off you'll be, in my opinion.